I grew up on Achewood. For anyone who's been a fan since it started back in 2001, Chris Onstad's weird and wonderful webcomic absolutely transcends the genre, particularly the genre of its contemporaries, as webcomic is not a high hit ratio medium, and the returns were even worse circa the mid to late 2000s. Achewood stars a variety of animals of the stuffed and pet variety. Over time, the lead characters became the best friend pair of cats, Ray and Roast Beef. Their antics and conversations, from the extremely mundane to heavily debauched to psychedelic or surreal, constitute what could be considered the plot of the comic, which is less interested in story arcs and more in putting characters in situations to be funny by virtue of being themselves. The most significant exception to this is the Great Outdoor Fight arc, which is an absolutely perfect story, and I will brook no disagreement. The comic matures in complexity, presentation, and serialization over the years, but it never loses its core asset, which is that nearly all of its named characters are fully formed creations of both comedy and pathos that could headline a comic strip all on their own. Onstad was at the height of his powers writing Achewood, as I was awkwardly wandering through my high school and early college years. This was a weird, wild time to be ingesting such a weird and unique property. By the time it came to what seems to be its final end in December of 2016, Achewood had wormed its way fully into both my psyche and my vocabulary. Vocabulary is what I want to discuss today. When I put Shakespeare in the title of this video, I wasn't just trying to say that Achewood's so well written that it holds up against the classics of art and literature, though it totally does, and I haven't yet seen a Shakespeare play in which someone vomits at a football until it moves about 3 feet, or in which a cat dresses up like Abraham Lincoln to do a rap. So you tell me which one is better. Anyway, Shakespeare's not just famous for having written plays with resonant characters or story arcs. He's considered a foundational writer of the English language because he literally invented some of it, presumably in the course of contorting the language he had to fit the strange rhythms of iambic pentameter or what have you. There's apparently some debate over how many words precisely Shakespeare invented, as opposed to simply being the first to write them down or the first to write them in a particular variation. Generous scholars put the number at or above 1,700, but even minimal estimates still have Shakespeare scribbling down hundreds of previously unread words, from auspicious to zany, with words like stealthy, quarrelsome, epileptic, and circumstantial all in between. It's not the subject of this video, but it might be interesting to read or watch a deeper dive into the parts of speech that Shakespeare's words tend to occupy, among other things. I see a lot of adjectives in the listings I've found of Shakespeare's creations, particularly adjectives used to describe a person or a group of people. This tracks. It's in finding continually novel ways to describe someone, as Shakespeare did a lot in plays that probably had minimal elaborate set dressing when he first saw them staged, and that therefore need to get a lot of mileage from people introducing or explaining themselves and other people constantly, that you'd most quickly run into a rut unless you had a knack for puns and wordplay. It's exactly that knack for wordplay that enchanted me when I first read Achewood, and it enchants me still anytime I return to its plentiful archives. Entirely new words are relatively rare in Achewood as far as I know, but there are a ton of novel and specific phrasings and constructions that knock me over, usually with laughter, each time I see them. What you're seeing on the screen now, from "the dude has got no mercy" to "pickles on parade" to "rough chuckles," is just the lightest glancing off the surface of what you can find across just about every panel of just about every strip of this comic that ran for nearly 2 decades. We're talking fully weird versions of syntax, new multi-word phrases coined as though they've been in use for generations, and entire worlds of subtext and characterization in fractions of a comic panel. Side note, huge thanks to the Facebook group Achewood, a momentary diversion on the road to the grave, also known as 90% of the reason I'm still on Facebook at all. Folks there provided over 140 answers to my question/call for specific examples of these neologisms. You're all wonderful. Sometimes the novelty of construction is itself the joke. Take Philippe's wonderfully silly "he is 5" presidential slogan, played so straight-facedly that it would read like someone stapled the wrong sentence onto the end of another sentence, except that it also feels perfectly like what a perpetually pre-adolescent stuffed otter might come up with. Other times, though, and most times since it's so frequent, these novelties are simply cumulative world building. Achewood's art style is, let's say, minimalistic. For the most part, there's no color and not a ton of detail to use to differentiate characters, emotions, and styles, though the comic absolutely mines gold from what stylistic range it does bring to bear. Almost all the weight of its characterization, humor, and pacing comes from small shifts in facial expressions, 2 or 3 details of costuming, and, crucially, all that pure, sweet black-on-white text. There are some formatting tricks that Onstad uses to get a baseline differentiator between characters or dialects. Roast Beef's typical lack of punctuation is a standout in helping to frame his timid, antisocial nature, and the comic's weird, half-anachronistic use of initial caps creates rhythms and emphasis that are totally unique to this world's lexicon. But everything else has to come unaided from the flavor of the dialogue, and Onstad works absolute magic, making each of his characters feel distinct and part of their own milieu, just in how they'll say something. It's funny, yes, but it's also powerful. It gets you rereading lines, mouthing them or speaking them in your head, and in that way attaching more forcefully to characters and situations than you might otherwise. That specificity, almost entirely through dialogue, is, I think, how Achewood has the capacity to pull off moments of genuine weight, despite being a comic about some cats and a few stuffed animals getting drunk and insulting each other for liking The Cure. You know Ray, like how Ray knows Todd. You know Theodore. You even know Nice Pete and Pat, like they're friends you were chatting with just the other day, because you've watched them talk in a conversational shorthand that only they can use. This is a high-wire act, by the way. Many properties that try to pull off novel or off-kilter slang or weird sentence construction don't succeed, especially if they're a televised drama or comedy, but also if they're talking about younglings in a far-off space future, or past, whatever. You have to make words said in a way no one said them before feel genuine and lived in, and to do that, you need a world where those words don't feel novel, even if their novelty is exactly what makes them funny or fun to read. I should also note that when I first read these things, as an insular and fairly privilege-bubbled teenager, nearly every sentence of this comic was a maze to unravel. Half the time I barely grasped the joke the first read through because I was working so hard just to parse the grammar. But I recognized then, as I recognize now, that the peculiarities are deliberate and harmonizing. They work together to build the world of Achewood, to make a black and white cartoon come more fully to life than anything else I can think of that even approaches the same medium. And, again, if you can find me a Shakespeare play where a cat in a thong dresses up as himself for Halloween and finds joy in jumping a motorcycle JPEG in a tiny window screen over a desktop background of a mountaintop, I might respect the man's work almost this much.